Major funding for this program is made possible by grants from Bank of America and Perfect Building Maintenance, Greenberg Traurig, LLP, New York Community Bank, Kilroy Metal Products, New York's Window Company, Capital One Bank. Additional funding for this program is made possible by grants from Akron Gold Brothers, LLC, Briarwood Organization, C.B. Richard Ellis, Cushman and Wakefield, First American Title Insurance Company of New York, F.J. Sciami, Friedman, LLP, Gemini Real Estate Advisors, Hal Fettner, Durst Fettner Residential, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, James Orphanides, Madison Realty Capital, Meridian Capital Group, M&T Bank, Massey Knackle Realty Services, Muss Development, Newmark Knight Frank, Sterling and Sterling, Stonehenge Partners, Des Moines Group, Urban American, W Financial Mortgage Fund.
Hello, my name is Michael Satoler. Welcome to Building New York. I love interviewing people who grew up in Brooklyn. You know, I'm a Brooklyn boy, and I was originally born in East New York. A guy a couple years older than me, this way I'm not even going to tell you his age because then you'll figure out my age, was born in East New York, and his name is Stanley Brezenoff. And when you hear this interesting life, you will learn a lot about this guy. But today, Stanley is the president and CEO of the Continuum Health System, the 5th largest private employer in the city of New York, running all of these hospitals. And Stanley has been involved with New York City, a true builder of New York, and I'd like to welcome Stanley to my show.
Well, thank you for having me, Michael.
So you were born, you're involved with hospitals, and you were born, needless to say, in a hospital. It was used to be called Bethel Hospital, which is now Brookdale Hospital in the East New York section. And as you said to me when we got together, you lived on Van Sicklen Street, and it took you many years to leave East New York. I mean, it was a long time period. Van Sicklen, then Starrett City, and some other places, right?
That's right.
You went to public school 149 with the legendary Danny Kaye?
Well, not with him.
No, he was a little before
He was
a little older than you. Right.
But he's our most illustrious alumnus.
Wait, you could be possibly. And then you went to Thomas Jefferson.
That's right.
And then you said to me, probably when you were in high school, there could be a terminology, a trumpeter, or something like that. You preferred the poker halls, the billiard halls, the racetrack, but you went to Brooklyn College, and it's great because, we're on the CUNY network, so you went to Brooklyn College, and you were telling me that at Brooklyn College, you had college is normally a 4-year plan. You had the illustrious 6-year plan.
That's right.
And when you were, I think when you were in high school, you said you worked and you were living in East New York. You schlepped to Yorkville to work in a grocery store, and then you worked in electroplating for pocketbooks. What was that business?
It was while I was in high school. Everybody worked. Nobody was rolling in money. I got a job in a storefront electroplating business. I'm not sure it even exists as a commercial activity these days, but literally boiling pots of different kinds of metal, and the frames of pocketbooks were placed in them to replate them. These were generally used pocketbooks, and the temperature in the summer, because I worked full time in the summer, used to be 110 degrees, but they paid, and that's all that I cared about.
So let's discuss the college, and then the interesting story about your late brother who helped you get through college.
He certainly did. Well, you aptly all too accurately described me. I was a less than serious student, particularly in college. And East New York has many advantages. One of those advantages is close proximity to racetracks like Aqueduct and Roosevelt Raceway, and a couple of very nice pool halls with tickers for sports results, and always available poker games, things like that. And so I sort of balanced college life with these other very important pursuits. The result was my time in college kept getting extended. My brother, who was several years younger than I, was of a different stripe, and he very diligently went through college, doing exceedingly well. Parenthetically, he got his PhD when he was 27 years old. He was graduating, and I'm 3 years older than he was, and I saw him lined up to graduate, said, "This can't happen," and I started doubling up, taking 2 terms in one over a year and a half so I could graduate at the same time. Still 2 years late, but at the same time he did.
But the interesting thing is you graduate, and everybody knows who you are in the city. You graduate with a major in philosophy. I mean, truly a skill that you could utilize in a career. So you graduate, and then what do? You do what the rest of us try to do. You join the Army Reserve. So Stanley, who has such a background over here, you find 42nd Street now. There's the Silver Towers. There are other things, or apartments. You found the Army Reserve, over there. And where'd you go away for the 6 months?
Fort Jackson, South Carolina. Like other people, it was the time of the draft, and you could avoid a 2-year or more length of service by going into the reserves for 6 or 7 or 8 months and play out the rest of your military obligation
on the weekends, like I did, right?
Weekends, 2 weeks in the summer. So that's what I did.
So now you got to, okay, I'm finished with the Army Reserve. I got my weekend over here. I have a degree in philosophy. He said, what am I going to do for a living, right? You took a federal service examination?
Well, I did, because I had absolutely no notion of what I might do for a living. My dad was with the U.S. Customs Service, so I took the FSEE and ended up in the U.S. Customs Service.
And what did you do for the Customs Service?
Well, this is a big economy we live in, and a big part of the economy is imports, and imports of very valuable goods. I'm not talking about individual lots of jewelry, but automobile parts, steel, technological products. They need to be valued, and there are methodologies for valuing them. So I was trained by the federal government to figure that stuff out, place values on those goods so that they could be adequately dutied. This is probably in the era of free trade. This was before free trade. In the era of free trade, this may be much less important, though there are a number of important issues going on right now. For example, Chinese tires that go to the question of value and how those tires are manufactured.
So you didn't like working for the feds. So you
have to have a certain personality to do this work.
So then you go to work for the Dutch. You go to North American Phillips to do what?
Well, they were interested in building an export business to the United States. They had a U.S.-based company that essentially brought in their goods, and I went with a more senior customs official to work for them. Not very long, though, because it was the same kind of work.
But, so here's a situation. You're still living at home. You really didn't care for the job. And you told me that your family, one might say, were involved. They were on the left side. You said some of the relatives used to be there for the concert of Paul Robeson.
This is true.
And then you had some relatives who refused to go to Yankee games because they didn't have any African-American players.
This is all true.
So here, you go out and get involved. This is the time of the White Castle situation in the Bronx. You get involved with CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality?
Yes. It was, I was working for North American Phillips at the time, not completely happy. You may remember there was an effort to force White Castle to hire people of color. And White Castle, hard to imagine today, and it's actually not that long ago, I suppose. Well, I guess it's almost 50 years, 1961, 62. White Castle did not have any people of color working behind their counters. They were not alone in this, but since they operated in many minority neighborhoods, it was particularly outrageous. And there was a concerted effort led by the Congress of Racial Equality in New York, in the Bronx and Brooklyn, to, through demonstrations, force them to change that policy. In the Bronx in particular, the local neighborhood was not supportive of the demonstrations. That's putting it mildly. They were abusive through things at the demonstrators. I remember riding home on the subway and reading about it and saying to myself, this isn't 1,000 miles away in some backwater in Alabama or Mississippi. This is right in your backyard. It's time to put up or shut up. You can't keep talking about a personal or even family commitment to equality and ignore what was happening. So I volunteered to work at CORE around this, and that introduction kept growing to more and more of a commitment, so until I quit my job. And spent...
And then you worked for, how many years were you at CORE?
From 1962 to the beginning of 66.
So it was 1966, and now it was about time to move out of your parents' apartment because you were getting married, and you moved to Greenwich Village.
Well, my girlfriend had an important attribute. She had an apartment.
She had an apartment, and she also had a job.
Right.
She was a school teacher, so, you know, she had an apartment, a job. Unfortunately, the apartment was on the 5th floor of the walk-up.
This is also
right.
true.
So what happens is Stanley has to try to find some type of career. And you tell me the story of the Daily News or the Sunday New York Times. I'm not sure which one, because I remember when I grew up in Brooklyn, Saturday night you were able to pick up the New York Times and the Daily News on the street. So you were walking on the street and somebody said, "I was looking for you"? What was this?
Well, I had been hunting for employment unsuccessfully. In fact, to the point where I had decided to go back to school. My reputation as an activist was really getting in the way of employment. And so I had decided to go back to school.
You mean you were a troublemaker, one might say?
At that time, I was a young man, and I guess it's fair to say I was making some trouble. I ran into a man named Frank Espada, who was working in the then new Lindsay administration, and whom I knew from community organizing efforts in East New York. He was another East New York fellow. And what he meant was that he had been assigned by the Lindsay administration to work on the emerging war on poverty, the Community Development Agency. And he thought that my background and experience would lend itself to that work. And he had been looking for me, and he offered me a job.
You think he was looking for you because you remember the poker games in East New York?
No, this was the real. This was the new.
This was the new Stan. Okay, so you go to work for the Lindsay administration for a couple of years, right?
For 2 years, yes.
And then there's another individual who you meet, because you were still thinking maybe, graduate school, and then you met Mike, right?
Well, the head of the super agency that the Community Development Agency was a part of, called the Human Resources Administration, was a man named Mike Spiritoff, who had come from New Haven along with Ed Logue at Lindsay's behest to create the two super agencies to lead the effort to transform New York, to attack poverty, to attack urban decay. And Mike Spiritoff was the leader on the social side. And I had various interactions with Mike, and he was tapped to become vice president for national affairs at the Ford Foundation,
which was the largest foundation
at the time, and the biggest social activist foundation, involved in everything from school decentralization and community empowerment to community development, voter registration, employment and training, and so on. And Mike said to me, you should come to work for me. I remember his phrase very well. You're going to work hard, you're going to learn a lot, and I'll take the rough edges off.
And you said Mike was a street kid. I mean, he
never went to college.
Never went to college, but he had a high position. And then you spent like 8 years.
8 years working for Mike.
And as you said to me when we got together, that was the real graduate school education for you.
Absolutely. You can't. At the Ford Foundation, in addition to Mike himself, who is just the best mentor that anyone could have, there was exposure to the highest level of professionalism and intellectual creativity in the public policy arena that anyone could want. George Bundy was the president. Robert McNamara was on the board. Alex Hurd, David Bell, who had been budget director under Lyndon Johnson, was George Bundy's, Mac Bundy's deputy. Fred Friendly was there running the communications division. Harold Howe, former Commissioner of Education, ran the education
You could have even
department.
accomplished your master's and your PhD from that type of group.
Absolutely, just by osmosis, just sitting next to them.
So now you leave the Ford Foundation, and what happens? You want to go back to the government?
Well, the Ford Foundation was and is a wonderful place, but being there 8 years and sort of out of the action, being the funder and the supporter, a really important role, but I really felt the need to get back into the action. And my last year and a half at the Ford Foundation, I was looking very diligently to get back into that action. Koch was elected mayor, and while I did not know him, he used the vehicle of selection committees to vet candidates for senior positions, and I came through one of those committees for the Department of Employment, the Comprehensive Employment and Training Act, the CETA program, and so on. And 2 or 3 candidates came through. He chose me after interviewing me, and I became commissioner of the Department of Employment.
After that, the next job you had before you got to Health and Hospitals
was to run the Human Resources Administration, the organization that my mentor had run.
So now, out of nowhere, and probably the only time that you had been in the hospital was, when you were born and when your son was born. Now you become president of the largest municipal-owned hospital system, Health and Hospital Corporation?
Yes. That after resisting it for some time. At that point, the Health and Hospitals Corporation was in very difficult straits, both financially and otherwise. It was an organization that was put together as an illogical, logical construct, meaning that somebody sat down and doped out how it might look and then put it into effect without regard to all of the complexities that militated against success. Financially, it was a disaster. And the city itself, in very difficult financial straits, was being drained by the continuously growing need for subsidy to the hospital corporation. When Ed asked me to take over HHC the first time, I responded by saying, I don't know anything about hospitals. In fact, the only time I've been in one was around both of those events, my own birth and my son's birth. And while he accepted the negative response initially, he kept coming back and finally said, "You really have to do this for me. They were just in here an hour ago asking for another $100 million. I don't care what you do. You just can't come back here and ask for $100 million." So
Right.
I took it.
And you said to me you work with Bobby Wagner.
Bobby Wagner was, throughout my 3.5 years at the corporation, the chairman for most of that, the chairman of the board of the corporation. And Bobby Wagner, first personally, was a joy to work for, and another one of those brilliant, above the pack kind of individuals. And his support and guidance were essential to my tenure at the corporation.
During you leave Health and Hospitals, you become first deputy mayor?
First, I was a deputy mayor for operations. About a year and a half later, the mayor made me the first deputy mayor. This was contrary to what he had said he would do. It didn't change anything in substance. In many ways, Ed was his own first deputy mayor, and the rest of us were kind of special assistants. But I do treasure the fact that he wanted to demonstrate his feeling for me in designating me as first deputy mayor.
So the Koch administration ends, and it's time to find a job again, and you now go to the Commonwealth.
I went to the Commonwealth Fund in part based on some advice that the president of the Commonwealth Fund gave me. Maggie Mahoney, who's one of the great people in healthcare and in philanthropy, Maggie urged me not to take the first job that came my way, whatever it was. She recognized that I had a son going to college by then, and that I needed to work, but she really did not want me to just grab onto anything, and offered me a period of time at the Commonwealth Fund, a foundation, to serve as a kind of senior advisor and to work on selected projects until the right thing came along.
And that was the Port Authority.
That was the Port Authority, one of the greatest jobs in the public sector anywhere.
I mean, you had the Port Authority, had the airports, the bridges, many of the bridges, and the Trade Center.
The Trade Center, the seaport, the tunnels, a number of industrial parks. It is the largest public authority. It is a bi-state compact generated through act of Congress. It has a wonderful professional staff, perhaps one of the best in the world.
And you were there also probably in the first bombing of the World Trade Center.
I was indeed there for that first attack.
So after, change of administration, Cuomo's out, Florio's out, it's now time that you find it's strange. You had only spent 3 years really in the hospital business, and then you meet Marty Paterson, who's the chairman of the board of Maimonides. So you come back to our roots, you come back to Brooklyn. But at that time, Maimonides was a 700-bed institution, also like the Health and Hospital Administration, in a little Circe, one would say, right?
Yes, always, like AJ, had wonderful physicians, did terrific things clinically, but was under financial stress, had reputation issues, some of them justified, many of them unjustified, but in a sense, when reputation is going south on you, it doesn't matter whether it's correct or incorrect. You have to figure out what to do about it. And Marty Paterson and I were of one mind in terms of an agenda to turn around those problems, put Maimonides on a track to once again be a premier institution. And I think he and I together succeeded.
Right, I think there's no question you didn't. You got involved with the Hotsolers and the other community, and you really built a great relationship. And the hospital still is probably even though you're involved with a hospital that has another Brooklyn presence, Maimonides is the premier hospital in Brooklyn. There's no question about that.
Absolutely, Mike, and I'm happy for that. They serve really important communities. Surprisingly, it is the most kosher hospital and
more births
than anyone. But it is not just the hospital for the Orthodox Jewish community. Probably less than a third of the patients are from that community. It also serves several Islamic communities, the Pakistani community. There's an Arab community, big Asian community, and traditional Catholic communities.
So you had a nice job in Brooklyn. You were back in your roots. You could have maybe even moved that back to Brooklyn, East New York, not really on East New York. And then you decide to go to this combination, which was really created in 1977, of the St. Luke's, Roosevelt, and the Beth Israel, this thing called the Continuum Healthcare System. You needed a new challenge in your life in 2003?
Well, I like the ecumenical nature of it, Episcopal, Jewish, but you're quite right. At some point, even when you love where you are, and I loved Maimonides and the people there, and I still do, and the community leaders and Hatzola and so on, there comes a point when you're not fresh anymore, in my view. When some new blood and fresh approaches would benefit the organization, and you need to recharge your batteries. I was there for nearly 8 years, which is as long as I've been anywhere. And the challenges at the Continuum were significant and continue to be, but with some progress. And I wanted more challenges. I didn't want to simply oversee an organization that, of course, still had challenges, was more or less stable.
And in the same way of Marty Paterson, you had the great opportunity to work with some really good board members at the Continuum Healthcare System.
Well, Mort Hyman, who had been the chairman for over 20 years, a really wonderful guy whose commitment, first with Beth Israel and then to Continuum, has just been extraordinary. And he has quite a history in the healthcare field. Really? He was very close to Commissioner Axelrod. He worked with Commissioner Axelrod and Governor Carey on a number of important issues. And when he stepped down as chair, Larry Huntington, who was another real pillar.
He was on the St. Luke's side.
He was on the St. Luke's side. Is now the chairman of Continuum, and he too has an amazing history.
So for a kid who said, the pool halls, you're probably good on 8-ball, and some other things, you have really had a diverse career, and being the CEO and president of the 5th largest employer and probably one of the most important healthcare systems, because there aren't too many. It's Continuum, it's New York Presbyterian, and maybe the NYU system. You've truly, and the Port Authority, you've been truly a builder of New York, and I'd like to thank you for being here today.
Oh, it's been a pleasure, Michael. Always. Thank you.
Major funding for this program is made possible by grants from Bank of America and Perfect Building Maintenance, Greenberg Traurig, LLP, New York Community Bank, Kilroy Metal Products, New York's Window Company, Capital One Bank. Additional funding for this program is made possible by grants from Akron Gold Brothers, LLC, Briarwood Organization, C.B. Richard Ellis, Cushman and Wakefield, First American Title Insurance Company of New York, F.J. Sciami, Friedman, LLP, Gemini Real Estate Advisors, Hal Fettner, Durst Fettner Residential, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, James Orphanides, Madison Realty Capital, Meridian Capital Group, M&T Bank, Massey Knackle Realty Services, Muss Development, Newmark Knight Frank, Sterling and Sterling, Stonehenge Partners, the Moynihan Group, Urban American, W Financial Mortgage Fund.